the question that most people are asking now is where next for Anthony Joshua? Who is he going to fight in his next fight or next few fights? Well, he has some mandatory obligations to take care of first. He is now the holder of 2 major world titles. I know he holds the IBO as well, but we don't count that. Kubrat Pulev is the mandatory challenger for Joshua's IBF belt. Luis Ortiz is the mandatory challenger for his WBA belt. From what I've seen, the IBF are being more bullish about enforcing their mandatory. And that's normal with the IBF. They tend to be very bullish and forceful when it comes to enforcing their mandatories. The WBA seem to be a little more lenient with this Luis Ortiz situation. I know Ortiz wants to fight ASAP, but the WBA haven't been as bullish in some of the language they've been using as the IBF have. So he's probably going to have to fight at least one of those guys later on this year. But there's also the matter of the Vladimir Klitschko rematch. Very unusually, Klitschko is a challenger for a world title, had a rematch clause in his contract. And hey, you know, Joshua agreed to it at the end of the day. Nobody forced him to fight Klitschko. He had a rematch clause in his contract, which he can activate. He has a certain period of time to activate this rematch clause and fight Anthony Joshua again if he so chooses to. If that happens, there is the very real possibility that Joshua could get stripped of one or even both of his titles if he fights Klitschko in his next fight instead of one of his mandatories. So he could end up in the same position as Tyson Fury, getting stripped of his belts for not fulfilling mandatory obligations. It would be unfortunate if that happened. It was unfortunate when it happened to Fury. It was unfortunate that Fury didn't get back in the ring. And, you know, I really was disappointed that Fury had this rematch clause with Vladimir Klitschko. I wanted Fury to move on and fight other people. I didn't want him to get bogged down fighting Klitschko again. And it's the same with Joshua. I don't want him to get bogged down fighting Klitschko again. Even though the first fight was a great fight, I don't want to see it again right away. That's just my feeling. There are so many other great fights in the heavyweight division to be had. I'd rather see those. I'd rather see Joshua tread pastures new rather than old pastures. And also, it's just my belief, I could be wrong, I believe Joshua would handle Vladimir Klitschko a lot easier in a rematch. I don't think Klitschko can do any more than he did in the first fight. I know people are talking about the 6th round where he didn't go for Joshua, but Joshua made mistakes to be in that position. I believe in the rematch he wouldn't make the same mistakes he made first time around, and he wouldn't give Klitschko the opportunity to do what he did to him in that 6th in the first place. That's my view. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's one of the reasons why I'm not desperate to see the rematch immediately. Because I think Joshua would handle him a lot easier second time around. I think he'd be a lot more aggressive, a lot more confident and sure of himself. And I don't see Klitschko being able to summon the kind of courage that he did that, you know, first time around. That was almost a Costa's last stand type performance from Vladimir Klitschko. You know, I've often criticized Klitschko in his career for a lack of internal fortitude, a lack of courage. And in the Joshua fight, he showed immense courage, immense heart, confidence actually, immense confidence. Even under pressure, even in a crisis situation, Klitschko didn't crumble mentally. And that did kind of surprise me because in previous fights he's had, he did crumble mentally. Even fights where he climbed off the canvas to win, like against Sam Peter, he was petrified in that fight. He didn't have the fighting heart and spirit that he had in the Joshua fight against Sam Peter. It was obviously much earlier on in his career. He wasn't as sure of himself. He hadn't been through so many tough experiences which had strengthened his resolve. But even as recently as the Tyson Fury and Bryant Jennings fights, Klitschko was showing mental vulnerability. So this is why I criticized him for so long, mentally, for not being that strong as being an on-top fighter, a guy who is very confident and bullish when things are going his way, but when they're not going his way, he capitulates mentally fairly quickly. And I stand by all those old things I said about Klitschko. But sometimes a fighter can have his back against the wall, and where he used to quit and where he used to capitulate and crumble, because he's got nothing left to lose, he comes out swinging and he produces a courageous performance, which is uncharacteristic of him. Two classic examples: Buster Douglas. He was never known as a guy to have too much heart or courage, but when he fought Mike Tyson, his mom, who he was very close with, who was his best friend, died just 2 weeks before the fight. The mother of his kids was diagnosed with cancer during the training camp, and Buster Douglas also had the flu and was on penicillin going into the Tyson fight. Tyson at the time, the most feared man in boxing. So Douglas was up against it, and he came out swinging, and he showed heart, which he'd never shown before in any of his previous fights in that Tyson fight. He showed tremendous heart. Another example would be Victor Ortiz. You know, he quit against Marcus Maidana, and he's quit in fights since then. But that one night against Andre Berto, in the first fight, Victor Ortiz showed tremendous heart. There was never any quitting him that night. Sometimes, as I say, when fighters have their back against the wall, they will come out swinging and they'll produce the type of courage you've never seen from them before. And that's what Klitschko did in the first Joshua fight. I'm not convinced he can do it again. I'm not convinced. Maybe he'll prove me wrong, but I'm not convinced. I don't think he has the kind of effort left in him to produce a performance like he produced against Joshua last Saturday from an emotional, mental point of view. I think that was his last hurrah, to be honest with you. So that's why I'm not clamoring for a rematch. Anyway, got a bit sidetracked there. So who should Joshua fight? Let's say he fights the mandatories and Klitschko doesn't activate the rematch clause. How would he deal with the likes of Luis Ortiz or Kubrat Pulev? I think he'll be favorite over both of them, rightfully so. I see the Ortiz fight as more dangerous, but definitely winnable for Joshua. The Kubrat Pulev fight I see as a more fiddly fight, because Kubrat Pulev is a very good boxer. He's got a very good jab. An awkward fighter. But the way that Joshua dealt with Klitschko, yeah, he had a tough time, but he eventually got him out of there. You would imagine he should be able to deal with Kubrat Pulev as well, and probably stop Pulev. Pulev doesn't have the kind of punching power that Vladimir Klitschko has. Even though Pulev is a good boxer with a very good jab, he don't have Klitschko's punching power. So that's something Joshua wouldn't have to worry about as much. He could probably steam right into Kubrat Pulev and see what happens. Beyond that, there are unifications. Now, when it comes to the WBA, because they're not as bullish as the IBF, there's the possibility that Joshua, let's say, fights and beats Kubrat Pulev. And I'm not dismissing Pulev. He's a heavyweight boxer at the end of the day. Upsets do happen. But let's say he beats Pulev and then tries to go for a unification against Wilder or whoever holds the titles at the time. The WBA may agree to have their mandatory challengers step aside and allow unification to take place. Luis Ortiz has been on record in the past few weeks as saying that he wouldn't take no step aside money. He wants Joshua next, or the Joshua Klitschko winner next. He's not willing to do no step aside business. He says that now, but when somebody flashes a few million in your face and says, here, you can have this money without even having to fight, and then after it, you get your title shot anyway, where you're going to make even more millions, very few fighters refuse it. Let me tell you that. I've seen mandatory challengers be offered step-aside money on countless occasions throughout the past few decades in boxing, and very rarely do they refuse the step-aside money, because you're getting paid twice, essentially, for the same fight. You're getting paid for delaying the fight, basically. You're getting double your money. In some instances, literally double your money just for waiting a little bit longer, a few months longer to get your guaranteed title shot. So, yeah, if they offer Luis Ortiz a couple million and say, step aside, you'll get your title shot right after this, he'll probably do it. You know, he'll probably do it. We'll see anyway. Maybe he won't. Maybe because of his age, he's very anxious to get in the ring. If those unifications do take place with the likes of Wilder, Parker, so on and so forth, be very interesting to see Joshua's new confidence. He knows he can do the 12 rounds. He knows he can come back from a crisis. There'll be a bigger bounce in his step. And so how he deals with those guys is going to be very, very interesting. The two most immediate mega fights for Joshua are going to be Parker and Deontay Wilder, because those guys are ready and they're good to go now. It's not like with Tyson Fury where he's 100 or more pounds overweight and it's going to be at least 18 months before he's anywhere near championship level, even if he dedicates himself 100% from now in training. It's going to be at least 18 months, whereas the Parker and Wilder fights, they could happen, you know, in the early part of 2018, maybe even late this year. Because those guys are in shape and they're ready. And they're keen on the fight, it seems. So let me know who you would like to see Anthony Joshua fight in his next 1 or 2 fights, ideally. Would you want the Klitschko rematch? Maybe you prefer Luis Ortiz fight. Maybe you prefer a unification with Wilder or Parker. Let me know. And also let me know how you see any of those fights going down against Joshua. Yes, Joshua's vulnerable. But don't think the other guys in the heavyweight division are not vulnerable too. Wilder's vulnerable. Parker's vulnerable. It just so happens that Joshua fought a guy in Klitschko who's better than anybody Parker and Wilder have been in the ring with. So, yeah, anyway. Drop your comments, people. It's Hatman, I'm out.